Hey now, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the Cardinals Stand Out in Your Career podcast presented by Alumni Relations. I'm Nic Taylor, Executive Director of Alumni Relations here at SVSU. And today we've got a very special guest. We're going to welcome Vice President of Development here at SVSU, Mr. Brian Brunner. And we're going to talk all things about careers in development and philanthropy. So welcome, Brian. Happy to have you.
Hey, great to be here, Nick. Excited to be on here. I think this is the first time I have ever been on a podcast. So I was trying to memorize, my Simply Safe ads or Squarespace, no free ads or anything.
Perfect. We'll leave those out. I appreciate it.
Good.
So, Brian, we're here to talk about careers in philanthropy and development. And maybe first, it would just help for our audience for you to give us your backstory. How did you get involved with development work? Where did it come from?
Yeah. So I used to joke around about this early in my career. Not a lot of people are going to college and majoring in philanthropy. It's something that has kind of found folks, in a variety of different ways. Coincidentally, now I think you are starting to see some of these nonprofit administration and various programs pop up at universities where people really can have that dedicated career. But for me, it was not unlike a lot of my peers. The industry kind of found me. So, for example, my career, I had the opportunity to be a student athlete at Central Michigan University. Developed I think a good reputation not only at the university, with some of our leadership there, but also within the community in Mount Pleasant. Got involved with a lot of different things. So, after I graduated, did a few different things. Interned for the Green Bay Packers in their scouting department. Learned I didn't want to grind film 14 hours a day. A little bit reductive in terms of the impact you had on the world. And then, had a really cool opportunity to go play football overseas in Germany. And so did that while also writing a blog called Playing for Schnitzel, based somewhat on the John Grisham title, Playing for Pizza, about an expat who goes over and plays in Italy. But anyway, so toward the end of my time in Germany, it was an email from our athletic director at Central Michigan asking, hey, would you ever consider a career, in higher education, and I guess in that case, higher education and athletics administration. Hadn't thought about it, was a journalism student, English student, thought maybe I was going to be pursuing higher ed from an academia standpoint, but trusted the people there and developed some good relationships. So I, ended up getting on a call with Dave and said, hey, so what is the opportunity? What does this look like? And he said, well, it's kind of an alumni relations and reaching out to folks and, couched it in the most flowery way possible. And then I still remember, I think it was my first day on the job. And, my boss at the time, Craig Willie, was the director of the Chippewa Club, and handed me a call list of about 100 people. It's like, hey, we're in our university campaign. Can you make some of these calls? These are our mid-level Chippewa Club members. I'm like, oh, so we're just fundraising? He's like, yeah, it's fundraising. But, I came to really learn that it was so much more than, I think what people think of as of the students in the basement phone-a-thon. It was a lot of relationship building. It was a lot of, really fun experiences. And I really came to thrive in that profession and found my way to a lot of other opportunities, let's just say, in the world of philanthropy.
So speaking of those other opportunities, now you're here at SVSU. How did that come about? Where did the jump happen?
Yeah. So I had worked in athletics administration, athletics development for, the good part of early on in my career at Central Michigan University twice and South Dakota State University as well. But then right around 2020, I think a lot of us in athletics kind of saw some of the winds of change coming about, different legislative changes that were taking at the Division I level, the mission a little bit, or I should say a lot, away from, I think, what we all believed in is that, college athletics had always been this extension of an education, a classroom in and of itself. And that was changing in a lot of ways. People jumping from school to school, kind of really discounting the academic experience. It was all just about, okay, how can I get paid more? How do I get on the field? And, things that were really antithetical to my own college experience. So I made the shift in 2020 and began exploring opportunities beyond athletics development and seeking out some different assistant vice president for development roles. around the country. And I still remember the very day that set me on this course. It was in July of 2020. I just kind of thrown my hat in the ring for a job at St. Norbert's College, just outside of Green Bay, in De Pere, Wisconsin. And I got a call later that evening from an old colleague of mine, and I think one of the first words out of his mouth were, "Hey, have you ever thought about getting out of athletics? Because we have an AVP job open down here at Lindenwood University in St. Charles, Missouri." I was like, Brad, actually, as it turns out, I was thinking about that earlier this afternoon. And so, things kind of worked out as they did. Again, I will reference 2020. And so we went through the whole interview process virtually. I never stepped foot on campus or really in St. Charles, Missouri until after I had taken the job, and had a wonderful 4 years down there. And, I think it broadened my experience beyond, I think the important but very niche world of athletics development. And I had an opportunity to get involved with so many different things around campus. And you learn about different priorities in our colleges and the ways a university works. And so that really expanded kind of my expertise, if you want to call it that. I don't know if we're ever fully experts, but had a great opportunity to build a team there. We raised a good amount of money and increased it, and really, I think, instilled what I would consider a best practice development operation there, doing things the right way. And then, about 4 years later, in 2024, a search firm had reached out to me about an opportunity at Saginaw Valley, and was really intrigued. I having gone to Central Michigan, having worked there a couple times, knew the reputation of Saginaw Valley and met graduates of the university, and had never really come across someone that had a bad thing to say about SVSU. So I didn't know a ton about it, but knew it had a good reputation. It was highly thought of in the region as a major player from an economic development standpoint, and really a top-notch educational institution. So looking at the VP role was like, okay, am I at a point in my career? I'm at a point where I think I want to consider something like this. And I thought SVSU had enough understanding of the institution. I'm like, well, I know I could get to the interview process, and, probably a long shot to get the job, but it'll be really instructive for me to go through this. And it turned out, I got on campus, and I remember calling my wife, before the interview. I was like, gosh, I kind of hope I don't like this place, because I got things finally set back home. We got a good thing going. And I remember shortly after the interview, it was like, dang it, I love this place. This is a great place to work when you look at alignment, from leadership and what was being built, with the kind of Dr. Grant's new regime, and so many of the other people I met on this campus. You go around and heard, that asked people, how long have you been at SVSU? Oh, 20 years, 25 years. It's like, well, people don't generally stay at a place that long if it's not a great place to be. And so, when I got the call ultimately, a couple weeks later and got the job offer, it was, it didn't take a lot of deliberation to know, okay, this is the right place to be, and there's just nothing but opportunity to grow things from a fundraising standpoint, but also to be, a major player in kind of the lifting up of the city of Saginaw and our surrounding region. So very excited to be here. And, it's not... we'll probably talk about this, but you learn in careers in philanthropy, particularly in higher education philanthropy, you move around a little bit. Yeah. And so that's one of the, I think, exciting things, but also something to be aware of as people embark in this career.
You mentioned that, and as you were kind of explaining your experience, it harkened back to a previous episode that we've had here where we talked to Dr. Carl Reich about should you be, going for that VP level or that C-suite executive. And one of the things he talked about were the different buckets and the things that you kind of have to not necessarily give up, but you can't put all of your energy everywhere. And that's a perfect recipe for burnout. So as you think about that, and you talk about your experience here, someone who's going into development, maybe in the higher ed field, what are, for you, what was one of the buckets that you think you had to put more energy in, and maybe where did you take some of that energy from?
It's a good question. I mean, I think you really, people who generally get into philanthropy, there's often a misnomer that it's all art. It's all just, hey, it's shaking hands. And, I've been to a couple of professional development seminars, what have you, and they do that. Hey, what my friends think this is, what my parents think this job is, and
Sure.
what it really is. I think a lot of people think of, oh, yeah, you're just out playing golf for 5 hours and everyone just, you're going to a happy hour and that's how development's done. And it's really nothing about that. And so I think one of the things that you learn early on if you want to have success in this is, higher education development or development just in general, there's a lot more science to it than I think people give it credit for. It takes a lot of process discipline to understand, okay, am I ready to move a prospect on from, qualification to cultivation to, ready to solicit the solicitation. And, you're validating inclination and readiness. You're identifying who needs to be at the table. You're identifying gift vehicle. You're asking the questions that help the donor to, think aspirationally, to dream a little bit with you. And so, it really comes down to that, okay, hey, going into each meeting prepared, with a series of outcomes that you're hoping to drive. And so, when you talk about things that you had to dump a lot more into, for me, I think I've always naturally been a little bit more extroverted and able to connect with people. But I had to really focus more on that process discipline. And, I still remember, and I give credit, a great mentor and a friend of mine, Scott Brown, who I worked with at South Dakota State University. I remember going through, the evaluation process. He was technically my boss. And he's like, hey, Brian, you did a really nice job this year. And so, but I'm always seeking to improve. And I'm like, so Scott, what do I need to work on? He's like, well, you can talk really well, you can spin it really good and connect with people, but you need to shut up, man. You need to sit, you need to listen, ask questions, allow the donor to, make what their gift intention and their impact apparent to you, and you're only going to do that by leading with questions and listening. So, when you talk about what do you have to kind of pull back on a little bit, it's, make it less about yourself. This is about making the donor the hero of the story.
So one of the things I got to ask then is, when we look at, you mentioned about being extroverted and folks really kind of thriving, being able to get out there, but also sitting back and listening, which I definitely can expect and respect in that. What personality types then do you think really thrive in development work? And maybe even more importantly, who should stay away?
Yeah. Well, I would push back a little bit because I think there's a variety of personality types, and I really think anybody can find their space or their place in the development world. And I think that it is important to understand that frontline fundraisers only comprise a portion of all the different jobs that exist in philanthropy and development. I still remember a teammate of mine at Lindenwood. She was our development services manager, and coming from from BBCon, so that's Blackbaud is one of the big CRMs in our industry, and so a lot of the database managers, they go to that conference, and I think they spend a good amount of time talking about how none of the fundraisers could do it without them. And in a lot of ways, they're right. I remember her sending me a meme of, it's kind of like the Atlas holding up the world, and the Atlas being development services, really, who props up the entire industry. And so, but to that question, I think a lot of folks who are a little bit more introverted, who don't want to necessarily be, that face-to-face meeting every single day, over and over again, they lends themselves to having success in development services, where it is a lot more data management, where it's a lot more cleaning of data, prospect research, a lot of those type of things. And those people are vital. And in fact, you will find people who do, while it's a little bit more typical that you have your frontline fundraisers eventually kind of make their way up to leadership roles, you're seeing more and more, though, larger development services or advancement services staffs, and people who come up on that side of the house, finding their way into leadership roles just because, their personality might be better suited to leadership positions. And so, I mean, it's one of those things, you think about it in the context of management and organizational leadership. what commonly happens is, your top salespeople or maybe top fundraisers, hey, you're raising a bunch of money, let's promote you all the way up. Where, I'd always push back against that is like, why would I want to take one of my best men or women off the road that's raising a bunch of money or doing sales? Well, let's just pay them more and keep them, thriving where they're at, because maybe their skill set isn't necessarily suited for leadership. And so I think, that frontline fundraiser, a little bit more extrovert feeler. But I've had a number of development officers I've been able to work with and lead who really are, away from the workplace, a little bit more introspective, a little bit more, they pull back a little bit. However, when they're one-on-one with a prospect or even work in the room at an event, they can turn it on. And so I think it's recognizing those traits within yourself is, hey, do you like to be around people? Do you like to, have conversations? Are you intellectually curious to genuinely learn more about, what someone else has to say and someone else's experiences? So,
I think too, that's a great point about finding your strength, right? And there are different, we see it in our world all the time. We've got some amazing teammates who have a lot of different skill sets. And I think we do a great job of utilizing those skill sets as towards the benefit of the whole. I think what people and many of our young professionals out there might be worried about or thinking of, well, do I really want to go into philanthropy or fundraising? I think the biggest question is like, I hate being told no. So, fundraising often involves rejection. We know that. How do you stay motivated when sometimes it's a no?
Yeah. Oftentimes it can be a no. But I think I think it's going back to that idea of process discipline and the donor engagement process, right? If you build up, if you leapfrog steps too quickly, you can be setting yourself up, I don't want to say for a devastating no, but maybe a no that you're not expecting. And so that's where it all just goes back to, you need to follow the process. You need to follow the steps, and that first step really is, inclination and readiness. All right. You want to be diagnostic in that first meeting because if you're moving people along stages and you have not, decided upon that together, both the development officer and the prospect, you're going to be sending mixed messages and ultimately get into a place where you might think you're ready to make an ask and that prospect has no idea that it's coming. And ultimately that's going to land as a no, versus, hey, if you take your time, ask the right questions in that first step, it'll be pretty apparent, like, oh, this is not a major gift prospect. This is someone that, we need to be getting onto our annual giving team. Or, hey, this is someone that really isn't ready to be philanthropic or isn't inclined to be philanthropic. We need to find other ways if they do want to engage with the university or with the organization. We got to plug them in somewhere else. And so, I think that's one way you can overcome that. Some of that apprehension about getting told no is understanding, no, there's a process to this where, we should never get to a point where we're really being told no, if we follow it, because you'll not have gone those 3 or 4 other steps if you've kind of diagnosed at the front end, oh, this person's not philanthropic, this isn't the right fit. And so I think that's one way to guard against it. The other way I've guarded against it before in the past is, they're not saying, no, Brian, I dislike you. You are a bad person. It is, no, this isn't the right fit for my, philanthropy.
Sure.
And sometimes those no's can really lead to some big yeses. I still remember meeting with a prospect one time at Central Michigan, and one of our big projects we were working on was a new building on camp, or a new building in our football stadium. Meeting with the guy, he's very philanthropic. He's supported Central Michigan. And I remember we were meeting in Holland, Michigan, and he's like, yeah, this seems like a really good project, but come back to me when we got something for basketball. I'm not really interested that much in football. Like, I'll go to the games a little bit, but, where I really want to make an impact is on our basketball team. Great. No, I appreciate that candor. We've learned this. We don't have to do this song and dance, further along. And so but ultimately a couple of years later, I remember sitting with him courtside, bringing him into our club room, and our head basketball coach came in. We made a successful major gift solicitation for a basketball locker room project because, he had told me, we had developed that trust that this is where his philanthropic intent was. And when the time came, we were ready. We got the yes and made an impact on our program. So.
It seems like, you talk a lot about the process, right? In finding those successes in many different ways, and that the process, if it runs the way it should, we'll find it. I think what scares a lot of people off from this career field is it's very metric centric, right? We know how much we're raising. Yeah. We know what's being paid, right? Beyond just the fundraising goals, what are some of the other metrics that you think are really important, in that if someone was looking to get into philanthropy or development work, they should have a good understanding of, in order to impress that hopefully future employer? Yeah,
I think there's it's very interesting, because I think if you look at a 1980s, 1990s book on fundraising, it's meetings, visits. You got to have 20 a month. And the data has resoundingly shown that to be a flawed way of thinking. Right.
Really?
100%. What'll typically happen, especially either with a new development officer, or if you have a kind of a new development operation similar to what we're building here, you will see early on your meetings are going to be a little bit higher. Your asks, frankly, are going to be a little bit lower, because you're trying to build that critical mass, and you're trying to build a prospect base that is, again, inclined and ready and capable of making a gift. Typically then those things tend to invert, as that development officer gets a little bit more seasoned, as the operation gets a little bit more, you'll actually see meetings should go down significantly as you start to hyper focus in on those prospects that are most ready to be solicited. And so I think there's depending on if you have too old school of a boss,
right.
That can be challenging. But I think you're starting to see more and more that, as development operations get more sophisticated, the data says, hey, we don't need meeting hounds out there. We need people doing targeted, focused work, repeat meetings with, a smaller group of prospects that are moving them along the donor engagement continuum. And I've seen that borne out in my own career. I worked with an assistant vice president one time, and every monthly meeting, he had his little scoreboard in the office of, dollars raised and number of meetings. I was always in the bottom three in terms of meetings. I was always in the top three, and usually toward the top of the top three in dollars raised, because that, is what I found to be, a successful way to go about raising money. But beyond, those basic metrics, I think there's a lot of other things that I've tried to incorporate to allow our development officers, to be graded holistically and not just, based on those two key metrics. One big way is, how well do you involve leadership in some of these? How do you engage subject matter experts? So, I'll track, are you doing joint meetings with deans? Are you doing joint meetings with, university leadership or others? Partially the metric is, it's good in the donor engagement process to have subject matter experts in there and maybe more, additional credible voices. But it's also my way of trying to encourage our development officers to manage up. Hey, be able to be seen by other leaders as, wow, this is really a credible voice for the institution. This is somebody we need to get more involved in some things. And so there's a little bit of a career advancement bent to it. The other metric I like to include in there is some deferred giving statistics. And this is something really, I think Penn State was one of the leaders of adopting. For the longest time, you had planned giving has become this, monstrous cottage industry sometimes on the side, because there's kind of a mystification around it. Like, you say planned giving, that means estate attorneys, that means all these complicated charitable remainder trusts or, charitable lead trusts. And what does that mean? Probably 95%, if not higher, of planned giving are simple bequests. It's having a conversation with a prospect. Hell yeah, we have you on our will for 20%. Great. Can we have, the relevant portion of your will in order to document that and make sure your gift intentions are fulfilled? Oftentimes, actually, that's even no longer needed. A lot of organizations basically, here's a simple letter of intent. Are we in your will? Yes or no? But it also It is, and then there's also the fear about, from a planned giving standpoint, oh my gosh, how is this person going to want to confront the unknown and we're going to be talking about after they die? And I've never really had, anyone be off put with that. It's usually more of a gratitude, like, thank you for helping me think of my legacy and helping me think, what can I leave behind? And, I used to joke, there's 3 buckets, when you pass along, your family's one, your favorite charities or charity is another one. And Uncle Sam's the 3rd bucket. We want to squeeze Uncle Sam out of that picture to make sure your family and your favorite charities are getting that. So that's another metric I like to include is, hey, gift officers, I want you to have 2 deferred giving asks. This doesn't have to be farmed out to planned giving specialists or anything. You can have that conversation with the prospects that you've developed trust with. So.
You talk about the process and even with the planned giving and some of those, and I think a lot of people who are listening to this, the first thing they're going to ask themselves is like, I'm not really suited to do that, right? Like those are some heavy conversations, and you have to have a personality that's not just maybe extroverted, but that is also not afraid to have, I wouldn't say difficult conversations, but important conversations, have some gravity behind it. How did you know that you were suited for those kind of conversations? If you're somebody out here listening to this right now and is trying to decide on making a career change in this, how would they know?
Yeah, I think it's for me, it's born out of experience. It's born out of growing, I think, the right way in the industry. If you go on higher ed jobs or if you go on CASE, you will see a plethora of development to director jobs, senior director of development. And, there's sometimes, that shiny carrot out there for a young professional. All right, I want to jump into a major principal giving role because it's out there and people are hiring. They're looking for bodies sometimes in those roles. For me, I do believe it's still important. I mean, I think the right kind of person, rare cases, you can jump right into a major gift officer role. But I really think the preferred path is coming up through the annual giving game, right? And where you're making $500 asks, $1,000 ask, annual giving, really some of those mission critical, broad mission oriented asks. And it just gets you in the habit. It gets you of having those competition or those conversations where maybe the stakes aren't as high. When you're talking to somebody about, hey, can you make a $500 gift, be part of the President's Circle, or a $1,000 gift to our, in our case, the Cardinals Success Fund that impact, one of the most fundamental ways you can impact student success on campus. It reaches broadly. And so the stakes aren't necessarily as high if, that $1,000 ask doesn't go through because you got a lot more coming down the pike. But you still are having those conversations. You're still listening. You're still learning, what makes that donor excited about making that gift. And so then as you are ready to move on from the annual fund and start making some of those higher level, $25,000 and above asks, you've been through that. You've been able to sit in front of people and make some of those things where the stakes might not seem as high. And, I've had bosses tell me that, it's just a matter of another zero here or there, and that there's a great expert in our field from the University of Illinois, Bill Sturdivant. He talked about wealth being a renewable resource, right? They're not giving their bottom dollar, their last dollar. This is something that they're going to feel. They feel really good about their philanthropy. They feel really good about making those gifts. And then your role in that situation is to be a facilitator, right? I'm not like trying to pull it out of them. I'm saying, hey, here's some different, I use this example with gift officers. Would you rather take a test where it's, choose A, B, C, B, and C, A and C, like where you have all these different options where it's a little paralyzing, or isn't it nicer to just say, is it A, B, or C? That's your role as a facilitator, is to make it easy for the prospect. I'm not going to say, hey, what do you think about giving? It's, hey, here's 3 different ways others have chosen to partner with us. And, I don't want to make an assumption, but I think these are 3 ways that might resonate with you. And then you lay them out, making that ask and allowing, what is it? The root word facile, easy. Make it easy. Be a facilitator. So,
okay. I think that's really, I mean, it's very interesting when you talk about the process and laying out and being that facilitator. I think that's one thing when we look at folks maybe who are looking for that kind of career change going in, that if you're in your role now and you're facilitating, maybe you are handling a caseload or whatever it might be in the business world. I think that's a great word to kind of think about for folks. If you are comfortable being a facilitator, listening, like you talked about before, but then also guiding folks, that could be a great way to make that transition. Now, you've laid out a couple different, we talked about your experience. We've talked about, going from annual giving to major gifts, right? What does career growth look like in this field? I mean, I think it's difficult because for a lot of folks, for a lot of our alumni going in, come from places like education where it's really laid out, right? You teach for so many years, you get another degree, you go into administration, right? You do that for so long, maybe you retire, or, career growth, I think, in development is very different for most. So maybe give us a little.
Yeah. I mean, it can definitely be a nonlinear pathway. It can be, people who do come from more of again, I think there's a traditional career path, if you will, that says, hey, start off, get in the annual giving game, get into that, and then graduate onto a major principal gift officer. Now you start to expose yourself to comprehensive campaigns and how those kind of things take shape. And then you kind of move from that major gift officer role into an AVP type role where now you're managing a group of gift officers while also, carrying a smaller portfolio prospects yourself. And then ultimately, when you've had enough time doing that and you've had enough leadership and you're ready to expand, maybe into leading alumni relations and development, you're ready to go into that vice president role. That's maybe a traditional career path. I think you're also seeing people, whether you're in the not-for-profit sector, right? And maybe you're a business leader in a community, and you wanna, and you've worked, in corporate America. You've worked in some of those enterprises, and now you're ready to shift into maybe that pre-retirement mode, and you're overseeing, a community foundation or another, not-for-profit, a variety of those, your United Ways, your Boys and Girls Club, Habitat for Humanity. I mean, you name it. Maybe that's because you have developed a lot of relationships in that sector. That might be advantageous to moving into that not-for-profit space in a leadership capacity, because unlike a university where we have, Nick, how many dedicated constituents do we have right now? And 63,000, however many alums,
just over 55,000.
Just over 55,000. Okay.
About another 570 to be added here in a month or so.
Coming up soon. Yeah. I mean, and so that's one of the advantages we have, where we don't have to, put on a bunch of chicken dinners necessarily to identify who loves our organization. We have just over 55,000 card-carrying members that say, I have some relationship with Saginaw Valley State, where in the not-for-profit sector, no one's necessarily graduating from the United Way. And so that's where, coming from the business world or another space where you do have a lot of relationships, you can bring those to the table in an effort to, raise money, identify people who align with the mission, and do some of those other things. So I think, that's another career path. The other thing, you see this on a lot of development director, job postings is, hey, people come from the sales world. And it's an important thing I want to address. I could be glib and say, development's kind of like sales, except, if you don't want to worry about making a bunch of money, that you want to go into development. It's not really, they share some DNA in terms of some of the metrics, but really it's a much different process for development than it is from a sales standpoint, because ultimately, I've heard it described, we're selling air here in the development space. It's not necessarily a tangible asset you're giving to someone. It's more of, you're serving as a conduit to help them do the good that they want to do in the world. So, I think as people are thinking about, hey, is this something I may want to shift to? Is this something I may want to do? I think it is, it's one of those hardest, easiest jobs you're ever going to have, because it lends itself, you don't necessarily have to have a set academic background. You don't really even need to have a set, professional set of experiences to enter into this space. You got to come into it. I've always looked at that as I've built development teams is, I'll take that person who's really never worked in this, but has some of the raw talents that I can bring in. If they have a great attitude and they can be a great team member, we can train a lot of the things, that we do versus someone that has a lot of, quote unquote development bona fides that might be a bad fit on the team. That can be very disruptive as we all know, when you have a lot of churn and a lot of turnover in an organization, that can hurt in a lot of different ways. So,
no, we're getting to our last question. Our last question is always, fun for us here. But one of the things that, as you've been talking, that I've kind of reflected on is, I almost, we both share a love of sports, and I always think of the past decade in the Philadelphia 76ers. Trust the process, right? And you've mentioned it a couple of times about the process. And I think there is, even for myself, a longtime SVSU staff member, proud alum here at the institution, I think what I've learned in the past year is to really kind of sit back and look at the process that goes into this, because the process itself allows you to be successful in more ways than just one. With that being said, our last question is always, I want you to think of that gold alumni, graduate of the last decade, who's thinking about making the transition into development work or philanthropy. What's the one big piece of advice that you would give them? If you had just one thing to tell them, your elevator pitch, so be it, what would that be?
That's a good one. I mean, I think my elevator pitch in terms of why you should do it is, I think there are few careers that are as other centered as development. I think it's a way that, not only are you asking people to give back, but it's your contribution to give back to something that might have had a huge impact in your life. For me, I've always put a great value on education. And I thought the educational experiences I received, particularly, from my alma mater, shaped me and changed my life in so many positive ways that I couldn't help but feel great about making that ask, about asking people to invest in that next generation's experience, because this still really makes a difference. And that's higher education. I'll always be biased toward this because I think, it provides so many different ways for people to give back. I joke around, hey, do you want to, impact chemistry students? We got that for you. Hey, do you want to help, study abroad and broaden students' horizons? We got that for you. Do you like softball? We got that for you too. So I think there's so many different ways, but there's so many great not-for-profits out there. Hey, when you look at people who, this is a huge example, but and I'm conscious of this because of Deborah Hakes just made her talk on campus. SVSU alum, talked about her experience with the Carter Center and what they've done in terms of spreading democracy worldwide. But people who get involved with that, or President Carter himself and Habitat for Humanity. If you want to be a development officer in Habitat for Humanity, I think that's an incredibly noble, cause to be involved in, providing housing for people. So I think that's one of the exciting things about in a career in philanthropy is you can really make an impact on your world, and it's such an other-centered kind of thing. The other piece of advice I would say is, okay, you take that leap and you want to go into it. And this is probably more germane to higher education, is be flexible. Be willing to get outside your comfort zone. And I don't just mean that from a standpoint of, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can ask people for money. No, I mean, be flexible in where you live and your willingness to move and get to different places. I know this. I think we all those of us who've moved before know moving isn't fun. But gosh, is it a gateway to some really cool things. I would never be where I'm at right now if I wasn't willing to take a risk. Hey, I started in development at my alma mater, and okay, as comfortable, I could speak about Central Michigan. I went to Central Michigan. I did a lot of that
Sure.
stuff. I needed to grow beyond that. So that's why I went to South Dakota State and met some incredible people out on the prairie and had some cool experiences and grew my network, then moved back to Michigan, did that a while, got out of my comfort zone again and moved to Missouri. And again, picked up some mentors, picked up some lifelong friends. So sometimes to grow in our industry, you got to be willing to move. And that's okay. It's going to feel, a little bit of butterflies in your stomach sometimes. But I've always found that to be, those butterflies tend to be before the best things in my life, whether that was as an athlete stepping onto the field, or making big career decisions or big life decisions with your relationships. So I would say that's another piece of advice I'd have is be brave, be willing to be flexible and get outside that comfort zone and see some different parts of the world and parts of the country, because I think it's going to help people grow and do very well in this industry.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for being here and being a guest with us. We really appreciate it. For those of you out there, a great way, as this podcast is coming out, we're excited. We're in the renewal season. Our first year of Cardinal 100 is complete, and so we're excited. So as an alum, and we're looking at your annual giving, or if you've never given before to SVSU, it's a great opportunity. You can always check us out at svsu.edu/alumni to see all the different opportunities to obviously not only give, but stay engaged and talk with us here in the Alumni Relations Office. We love to hear from you. With that, I want to say it's a great day to be a Cardinal. Thank you so much for tuning in. We can't wait to see how our alumni are going to stand out here in the future. Go Cards. And cut.